always turn back to your network because it is often who you know rather than what you know that's going to bring that next client to you. Remember that it has worked out in the past, so there's no reason that it won't work out again eventually. The brilliant thing about being a ghostwriter is I don't have to know anything about any of those fields because the client is the expert. And what I'm doing, what I'm bringing to the table then is figuring out where the beating heart of that story is, where it starts. The buck stops with me, for better or worse. And so I have to find a solution for any problem that comes up in my business along the way. There was a lot of, I had to let go of that pride and be like, okay, Jess, you have a lot to learn. Writing is a craft like a sport or anything else that you only get better at with practice. And just really subvert the ego that I was bringing in to the process.
What you just heard were moments from my conversation with Jessica Bross, who turned her grandfather's final stories into a ghostwriting business, survived a devastating year 10 slump, and learned why pricing isn't about charging your worth from day one. In this episode, we explore how to build a sustainable business around something deeply personal, why adjacent revenue streams beat random diversification, and how the human touch becomes more valuable as AI floods the market. This is Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm Nikhil. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm your host, Nikhil Vaish, founder and CEO of Boost Solo. My next guest turned her grandfather's final stories into her life's work, proving that often the best business ideas come from the heart and that ghostwriting isn't about being invisible. It's about making other people's voices unforgettable. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nikhil. Happy to be here.
I'm excited for our conversation and I'd like to dive right in. So let me start by asking, you mentioned to me in our pre-call that your family told you there was no money in writing and you actually started college as a biology major to become a forensic scientist. So talk to me a little bit about the moment you decided to go against that advice and pursue your passion for writing.
That is correct. It was freshman year of college. I had really been struggling in my science classes. It was not a topic that came easily to me. And at the end of the semester, I was writing the end of semester lab report for a bio class. And just the act of writing that report, even if it wasn't about a topic I was passionate about, the act of writing brought me so much joy. And I just decided it was silly to keep denying something that I had such a natural inclination toward and a passion for, and was quite good at, it turned out as well. And so I said, hey, Mom and Dad, sorry, change of plans, and I hope you can support me in this.
I'd love to have been a fly on the wall on that Thanksgiving dinner when you decided to change course.
Yes, to their credit, they did continue to show support for that route. I don't think they ever stopped worrying, especially when I graduated in 2009, right into the tail end of the recession, and there were no jobs to be had for anyone. I'm sure they thought I would have had an easier time if I had gone a more practical route than English. But here we are today.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I remember there was an Egyptian comedian. He was really funny. His name is Basim Youssef. He was known as the Jon Stewart of Egypt. But Egypt and India share a lot of similarities in terms of, and my generation, it was a little different. So the way he put it was his mother told him when he said he wants to be like a comic and a show, podcast, news host. And it was similar for me when I said I want to go into advertising because the way parents thought then was, and this is how Basim put it. His mother told him, you can either be a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer, or a failure. So
very nice.
Yeah. So when I told my parents I was going to advertising, they were like, what is that? That doesn't even sound like a real profession. It was like you either did business or, something more practical like medicine or engineering. So things have changed since then. But yes, I can understand the worry that, the parents share. So you described your grandfather, Grandpa Jack, as your real first ghostwriting gig, right? Now, he passed away 4 days after you finished your book. So what did it feel like to see your family's reaction at his funeral? And how did that moment sort of solidify your decision about turning this into a business?
Well, it was an incredibly meaningful experience for me. My grandfather had been an arson investigator for the state of Kansas and worked on all these really cool cases that he was not allowed to talk about with family and friends until the statutes had expired. And by that time, he was an older man, he was getting sick, and he was worried that these stories were going to die with him. And so, having no ghostwriting experience, but of course, plenty of writing experience, I had gone on to become a professor of creative writing at the college level. During that time, I decided to start sending interview questions to my grandpa Jack, who then recorded his answers to these questions on a tape cassette recorder. He would then mail the cassettes to me in the mail. This was the only technology that he was comfortable with at the time. And I would transcribe those stories. Well, I first had to go to a thrift store and find a cassette player that could actually play those tapes. I would transcribe them, send them more questions back to him, and just really get to know this whole other side of my grandfather that I had not been privileged to know for the first 25 years of my life. And so I was so excited to be putting this book together that all the rest of our family and his friends could read and also get to know this new side of Jack. And it was both incredibly fortuitous that we were able to finish it before he passed, and incredibly sad that he didn't get to see their reactions for himself when they encountered these stories for the first time. But just seeing their reactions and how their eyes were open to this whole other side of this man they thought they knew, but maybe didn't know entirely, I really just thought, I wonder if other families would benefit from a service like this. I knew how much I had enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed working with older adults in general. I just think they're such fonts of wisdom and stories. And so that's when I first started advertising for ghostwriting to see if any other families, or in particular grandparents, were looking to write their life stories for their grandkids. And that's how Cider Spoon Stories was born.
Yeah, no, I love that story. And it's so personal, right? And also and I mean, I think most, the best businesses are born out of a real need that you discover, right?
Mm.
And in some ways you're as you were talking, I'm like, you're actually helping your grandpa live forever, right? Because his stories now can last generations in a way that you can't otherwise, because when they're orally passed down, as you said, especially the older generations didn't really share that much, right? About their
Right.
lives and about, so they probably they found him in a new, or discovered him in a completely different and new way that they may not have known. I love that about, the story you just shared.
I love that aspect of it too. As somebody who has never really been good at memorizing dates of history, right? Important dates and names of generals and wars and all of that. I found that in talking to the people who were alive during these periods of history that I was not alive for, it makes it feel so real and immediate to be able to have seen those time periods through their eyes. And so I just adore that in putting those stories down in book form, future generations will be able to have those firsthand accounts of what those moments of history were like in the making.
Yeah, and I would imagine it's a little different from actually sitting down with you and telling a story, because I'm sure you sort of self censor when you're telling somebody a story versus when you're writing it almost like a historical context, right? So I imagine there's a level of honesty when you're having a book written versus when you're just talking to somebody.
Well, that's true. But, that's also why our interview period when I'm working with a client is so extensive. We're not just sitting down and doing one take. We're doing multiple interviews over multiple weeks so that we can get really comfortable with each other and achieve that level of intimacy that allows for real vulnerability in storytelling, because that's where those best details come out that make something feel really real and tangible, that we can then capture on the page. And so definitely, if a particular story a client is telling is related to a historical event in some way, I'm doing some additional background research to provide the necessary context for the reader to understand that particular event. But we're certainly not out here just writing kind of dry history textbooks. These are very much immediate, heartfelt accounts of people who lived through it.
Yeah, and I love that, along with the historical context, you also get the human perspective, right? Because which is more fun than reading a history book, which has sort of important, but it sort of adds a layer, I think, that people can relate to on a human level. So I love that.
I hope so. That is the goal.
So you've been freelance, you've been on your own, I should say. You've been running your business for 11 years now. So, and that also, you've sort of chosen a very different lifestyle than a lot of your peers. So can you talk a little bit about some of the sacrifices you've had to make along the way that people don't see from the outside?
Oh, sure. I mean, the most immediate point of comparison is my siblings, right? I'm the oldest child. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and they both went the more traditional route of having 9 to 5 corporate jobs. My sister now works from home, so she has a little more flexibility in that. But, just comparing myself to them, it was pretty hard in those first few years to feel like I was struggling so much to get my name out there, to get my brand established, to have proof of concept that what I was doing was not only a viable way of making a living for myself, but also a way of genuinely helping others. And so even now, 11 years in, I still feel like there are years where I'm on that entrepreneurial roller coaster, where sometimes I have more clients than I can handle, and that's its own problem. But more often, I have had fallow periods where I did not have enough work coming in. And I was only able to sustain this company at that time because I have a husband who supports me, and I'm very privileged in that respect. So just the ups and downs, the unpredictability of the freelance or solopreneur life, the fact that there's nobody else to turn to for help when there are problems. The buck stops with me, for better or worse. And so I have to find a solution for any problem that comes up in my business along the way. I also have to deal with every client, whether they are a nice client or an unpleasant client to work with. There's nobody else to pass them off to. And then there's just the learning curve too of, okay, so I was skilled at writing and I had some education and training as a writer that didn't necessarily prepare me to run a business where I was going to have to file quarterly taxes and collect sales taxes on my services and file a DBA and form an LLC and all of that kind of stuff that you just have to pick up along the way. So there's also a big learning curve, especially when you're getting started.
Yeah, you definitely have to wear a lot of hats, right? I mean, I think that surprises some people because, and also in the early stages, at least, you can't necessarily outsource a lot of things because obviously that, until you have enough revenue coming in, then you can, I still say get an accountant. That's probably the most important thing to do. But
Yeah,
everything else, you kind of have to learn by yourself, right?
right.
So I totally relate to that. So let me ask you, so I kind of went through this quite recently, whereas and there are, like you said, there are peaks and troughs, there are ups and downs, or feast and famine, as one of my guests called it, and she was an accountant. Was there a time when you sort of questioned this, if this whole writing thing was going to work out? And what was the most valuable lesson you walked away with from that experience?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about just last year. 2024 was one of my worst years in business, and it was also my 10th year in business. And so I really very much wanted to be celebrating and feeling like I had reached this important milestone and come so far. And yet I was just not bringing in any money really to speak of. And I just thought the whole client pipeline had dried up for reasons I didn't even understand. I mean, we can talk about the economy tanking and all of that stuff. There's always other complicating factors. But regardless, when that happened, I did start to panic. Despite having 10 years of evidence under my belt saying that I could do this and make it work, I just suddenly felt like it was no longer sustainable. And so I started applying for full-time jobs. I was going to go back to academia and become a professor again. But I also just looked at different creative agencies and stuff. And as anyone who's ever searched for a job knows, that becomes its own full-time job. So while you're busy worrying about that, you don't have time to work on developing your business in the background anyway. And yet after about 10 months of that kind of panic, I ended up landing the biggest client that I've had to date, with a really fulfilling project, a challenging story to work on that tested my skills as a ghostwriter because there were lots of different voices involved that were being interviewed, and it was centered on a court case. So I'm reading hundreds of pages of deposition transcripts and all of this stuff that proved to be a really exciting challenge for me. And because that client was well connected, has since led to future book projects by way of word of mouth referrals from that client. So I think the takeaway, again, is just to remember that it has worked out in the past. So there's no reason that it won't work out again eventually. To always turn back to your network, because it is often who you know rather than what you know that's going to bring that next client to you. And also to not get so consumed in the job search or exploring other avenues that you forget to tend to the baby that you've been building for the last decade, because it's still there and it still needs you too.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. It's like, and you can have like you said, year 10, right? Multiple people feel like you cross a certain year. I mean, the stats tell you the first 5 years are the hardest, which they probably are, but that doesn't mean there won't be ups and downs beyond that, right?
Right.
And did this client come from, was it from your network? Was it a seed you'd planted earlier? How did the connection happen?
It did come from my network. It was actually somebody who I'd met on LinkedIn, of all places. Sometimes it is good to accept those random connection requests from people because it leads to a relationship that you never could have seen coming. And so, yeah, it was another ghostwriter who I'd met and networked with on LinkedIn who ended up sending me this client. So it
That's
was
amazing.
great.
Yeah. And you're right. Just to stress the network point, somebody, and it was not me, somebody said this, which I loved, that, and especially on the solo journey, I think it rings true. Your network is your net worth. And I
Mm,
totally, I have seen that, and I've like, because typically the shortest, everyone's like out there doing cold stuff and cold calling. And I'm like, no, start with your network, because there are people who know you, who trust you, who know your skills, who can, and that automatically becomes sort of a filter for anyone who wants your services, right? Because if it's coming from a trusted or reliable source, they're much more likely to end up working with you than if you just sort of randomly email people, and which, a lot of the industry today is trying to sell cold funnels and CRM and all these different tools, which I don't think are as effective as they make it out to be.
Yes, I've definitely found that to be true. I think humans in general, we are social creatures, and ghostwriting people's life stories has proven to me again and again, because the reason we are sharing these stories is to connect with other people and to help other people who might be in situations like the ones we've lived through.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about brand building now.
Mm-hmm.
You've, and you just sort of described it a little bit. You got this incredibly intimate service, right? Where you need to, like you said, you have multiple interviews. You really need to earn someone's trust, because you're literally capturing their life stories that even their family members may not know about, right?
Right.
So how do you market something so personal without making it feel transactional?
Anytime you are hiring a freelancer or solopreneur for something, you are depending on that person to be an expert in that field. The same way that you go to your doctor for healthcare advice or something like that. You go to a ghostwriter because they have spent their life refining their craft with words. They have really excellent listening skills. They're listening not just for what you say on the surface, but what might also be the hidden story or hidden emotion behind those words, and helping to pull that out in a safe and supportive way. So really that first call with a potential client is so important for just establishing that we jive and that we can work together. And if we don't, no harm, no foul. That's okay. There's another ghostwriter for you. But I feel like I have built my brand on, because I started with telling my grandfather's story, being somebody who really does just want to help people preserve their legacy. And, the fact that I also get paid in exchange for the time that I spend doing that is really one of the greatest gifts I can imagine.
Yeah, and do you typically stick to local clients? Is that what you say? It's more in-person interaction, or you have no geographic sort of limitation?
No geographic limitation. Although I will say all my clients have been in the United States. They
Yeah.
maybe were not from the United States originally. I've been blessed to work with a couple survivors of the Rwandan genocide, for example, and may begin work with a client from South Africa here shortly. So they are all living in this country now, but they certainly don't have to be in Austin, don't have to be in Texas. That, of course, is the beauty of Zoom and all the ways we have of connecting with each other wherever we are.
True. So let me ask you now, again, from a brand perspective, as a ghostwriter, you help other people tell their stories, right? So are there any areas where you struggle to tell your own?
Oh, good question. So when I'm not helping people write their stories as a ghostwriter, I also teach memoir writing classes and teach other people how to write their books in case that's a challenge they want to take on themselves. And without fail, people always want to know what's my memoir? What have I written that's out there that they can look to as an example? And that is not something that I have done yet. I write fiction in my free time, so I'm still definitely putting my work out there, but it is novels. That's where I'm pursuing that on the side right now. But I definitely will write a memoir at some point. And I am already implementing the kind of basic tasks that I teach people when it comes to memoir writing, such as, usually the very first step is sitting down and making a timeline of your life that includes things like where you lived during certain years, any educational pursuits, any family developments, things that were important from your faith life, medical challenges that you faced, all of that. We kind of map all of that out on a timeline. And then, can use that as a basis for deciding, okay, what stories are important in this particular book that we're writing. And so that's something that I am already doing for myself. I keep that updated timeline so that when I do decide it's the right time to sit down and share my story, I'll be ready.
That's interesting, though, that people actually ask you about your book rather than books you've written for people. That's kind of curious that because my mind wouldn't go. I'd be like, tell me some of the books you've written for people. But
well, if they're coming to me for ghostwriting, yes, they want to
yeah.
know about the books I've written for other people as a ghostwriter. But when they're coming to learn how to write their own memoirs, then they want to know about my experience with writing mine.
Okay. So I want to touch on that. You talked about sort of writing classes and offering editing along ghostwriting. Was that always part of the plan, or did you realize you needed multiple revenue sources to sort of make the business work? How did that come about?
It was always part of the plan, but specifically for what you just said, that I already knew I was going to need multiple revenue sources, and that rather than just limiting myself to one type of client, which is a client who wants their story ghostwritten, it would be better if I could meet any client where they were, including those who wanted to learn to write the books themselves or who already had finished their manuscript and now they need an editor to put an extra set of eyes on it before they try to get an agent or self-publish. And so being able to kind of meet any writer where they are. Oh, and then I also offer coaching as well for writers who want to write the book themselves, but want somebody to guide them through that process and hold them accountable to the production of new work each month. And so that's been great because it's just exposed me to that many more people with that many more great stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I love that they're all adjacent, right? Because there are a lot of solopreneurs I know who will be like, oh, this is, I want to create a new revenue stream. And it's like, I coach, but now I'm sewing jeans, which makes no sense whatsoever because you're doing something that's completely different and unrelated, which also breaks your attention, I think. And also you sort of lose focus on the core of your business. So I think it's smart to have multiple revenue streams as long as they're sort of adjacently built like you have. And also, I think it helps create a funnel, right? Because at some point, those clients may come back to you with a different need, right, to write their book. Or so.
Absolutely, yeah. It has happened on more than one occasion that a client has taken one of my memoir classes, fully intending to write the book themselves, and then they go, "Oh, I didn't realize how much work this actually was, how hard it is, how much time it takes, and I would instead rather just tell you my story and then you help me turn it into a book." So that's great too.
Yeah, true. So talking about that though, in terms of, so most people, I know everybody I know wants to write a book or has a desire to write a book. And yet it seems to be everyone also understands it's one of the most daunting things to do, right? To actually sit and stare at a blank page and then to think you have to fill 400 of those or whatever it may be.
Right.
Now though, there's a growing narrative that AI can just write anyone's memoir, right? It's like people are starting to believe, or at least are being fed this perception that you just have to create some great prompts and voila, an instant book will come out the other end. So how do you respond to that perception? And what do you think people miss when they assume AI can do the job you do?
Yeah, well, so A couple things. First off, I think AI is probably more useful for writing business books or leadership development books, things like that, where there's already a lot of material available online that can be sourced from to generate new material with. When it comes to a memoir or your life story, unless your whole life is already online, the computer just can't know all of those secrets that you've never shared with anybody else. And so you're right. If you write the right set of prompts, it could pull some of those out of you. But how much nicer is it to sit down with somebody who feels like a friend with a cup of tea and share those stories, somebody who's going to receive you with human empathy and react appropriately and ask those follow-up questions to pull out those additional details versus just the cursor and the text on the screen, asking you what your greatest shame was from your childhood or something like that, right? And so, but that said, every time there is a new AI tool that comes out, I've tried to mess around with it just to see what it's capable of. And by and large, the material it spits out, well, some clients have tried to use that as a starting point for their books. It generally requires so much revision and is so soulless still at this point. Like, it's not able to capture that client's personality the way a human ghostwriter can, who's listening for the ways that you use language and your specific vocal tics and all of that we're capturing to make it feel like your voice on the page. The AI it generally requires so much refinessing of what it spits out that you're better off just starting with a ghostwriter from the beginning. In fact, it might even cost you less than if you take your AI script to a ghostwriter and tell them to fix it. That's probably more work than just starting with a person from the start.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you. I mean, I use AI a lot, but I don't get it to think for me. I don't expect it to actually, sort of, because you sort of, it's like you're peeling the layers of an onion, and AI still cannot do that. You're really getting to the depth of a person, right, in their story, rather than just sort of giving you, and as I always say, AI is sort of the what do you call it, the sum of all averages, right? Because it's taken all the knowledge of the internet and
Yes.
it's giving, and it's also giving everybody the same outputs. That's what people don't realize now. In fact, there was a study today, I forget who did it, one of the universities, and they've found now that podcasts are starting to sound the same. They're finding consistency across languages, because so many people are just creating AI podcasts. And they're all starting to use similar words, same words and stuff like that. So I almost feel like, as we move forward, you will have an advantage. As people use more AI, the human touch, I think, is going to become more valuable and, more precious. So
I agree with you. It just means your podcast is going to be a unicorn too.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I hope we both will be. Yes. So going back to your brand now, you mentioned again you've worked with a lot of different people, right? You mentioned somebody, you have a client who survived the Rwandan genocide. You work with recording artists, judges, refugees. That's an incredibly diverse client base, though, right? So how do you position your brand and yourself to speak to all of them without diluting your message?
Well, the brilliant thing about being a ghostwriter is I don't have to know anything about any of those fields because the client is the expert. They're the ones who have lived their life and they're just telling me what happened. And what I'm doing, what I'm bringing to the table then is figuring out where the beating heart of that story is, where it starts, what the introduction or chapter 1, what is that hook that of everything that's happened in your life? Where do we start to make sure that readers keep turning pages? And so in the end, even though they are such a diverse client base, the art of storytelling is still kind of the same in that, I'm bringing the same considerations of voice and setting and plot and tone to each book. And it's just the particulars of those stories that are changing and that I'm getting to learn from each of those really interesting people along the way. That's awesome.
It is awesome. And I love that because the commonalities, everyone has a story and everyone's story is unique, right?
Yes.
And you just sort of help them tell it. But do people tend to pigeonhole or like, oh, I'm an artist or music recording artist and I want to work with somebody who's worked with recording artists? Or have you found that not to be an issue at all in terms of,
Um, that has come up occasionally. And if it's going to come up, it usually comes up during that initial get to know you interview with a potential client. And so, for example, I worked with a chaplain in the past who was concerned that we didn't share the same religious background. How would I, as his ghostwriter, be able to do justice to his story? And it was very much a case of, well, you're, you know what you do. You're an expert at being a chaplain. You understand the tenets of your faith. You're very good at explaining those to your congregation. And so I have no doubt you'll be able to explain that to me as your ghostwriter, and then I'll be able to translate it for your readers. So, people either believe that and say, oh yeah, of course we can make this work, or they go look for another ghostwriter. That's okay.
Yeah, true. You can't, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I agree with you. People often ask me, like, if somebody doesn't believe in brand, how can you work with, how do you convince them? I'm like, I can't, they have to sort of be open to it and they'll be ready for it. Otherwise they may never be, or maybe they'll be at some other point down the road, right? You can't really change that. So
Yeah. I mean, and also now having 11 years under my belt, I do have many, many books that I've worked on. People of different genders, races, sexual orientations, everything. And to be able to get inside the mind of somebody who sees the world so differently from me is probably the primary skill required of a ghostwriter. And so, they can also hopefully look to the body of work that I've gotten to help produce and see, okay, yeah, this is diverse, and maybe Jess can do this justice, and then we try.
yeah, true. And then the diversity helps there, right? Because you have covered, as you said, a range. So I
Yes.
think people will be less reticent because, you haven't pigeonholed yourself to just musicians or something like that.
Correct.
So I'm curious, what's one assumption people make about ghostwriting that's completely wrong?
um, a lot of people come to me assuming that ghostwriters write on royalties. So for people who don't know what that means that once you've sold your book to a publisher, right, there's a publishing agreement between the publishing house and the author receives a certain amount of money per every copy sold. And so some clients look for a ghostwriter who will write their book only on royalties, which means that ghostwriter is receiving no money up front, does not get paid until the book has been published, and the author is also making money on it. There may be a few ghostwriters who write that way, but from a business standpoint, it doesn't work. You're asking your writer to invest hundreds and hundreds of hours in producing your book for no pay, while we have our own families to support. And it's just not a good situation for anyone. So right away, I make it clear that I get my fee up front, regardless of whether you go on to publish the book. That's up to the client. But then if they do go on to publish, they keep every penny of the proceeds. I don't get royalties from that point on. So, in particular, it's a great model for if you are a fellow solopreneur or business person and your book is going to be a marketing write-off for your business, it's a no-brainer. They should do it then.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also, like you said, you've done the work. So it doesn't wait around to be paid for some other factor to sort of come into play. So I totally agree with that. Do you ever wrestle with the tension of being the invisible hand and wanting recognition for the impact you've had?
So again, every ghostwriter does this differently. Some require that they receive credit as part of their contract. I do not. I leave it up to my clients whether they want to share credit or not. And over the years, about 50% of them have ultimately. And so those that do are the ones that appear on my website that I can talk about, that, I say I had a hand in some way. And then, of course, I can help them market the book too, since I'm also affiliated with it. If a client chooses not to share credit, and for whatever reason, that's okay. I completely respect that. I'm still going to work just as hard on delivering a really quality product for them, because who knows, they might change their mind down the road and decide to credit their ghostwriter at some point, or I don't know, or I just also believe in doing a good job every time. And so I'm still going to bring 100%. And yeah, I leave it up to the client's preference. It doesn't bother me to not receive credit because, again, I've received my fee for the work. And so that also feels like a fair trade.
Right. And it seems like you just, like you said at the beginning, you love the joy of writing is also, there's value in that for you, right?
There
Because,
is, absolutely.
and I'm sure just hearing people's stories too. I mean, I find that sometimes people ask me, it's not so much, it's actually meeting people and hearing their stories that I love and being able to help them in some way, right? That
Yes.
you walk away with. I think that's more than, the corporate world is a little different because it's very bottom line driven. But I find in the solo world, people appreciate that more, the connection and the meaning that comes out of working with somebody, right? Versus just the paycheck, which is important, but
Yeah.
not the be all and end all of why we do what we do. So
Well, right. And in the end, this is still a way of honoring my grandfather for where this whole business started. And so, I know the kind of man that Jack was, and he was a good person, and that's who I would want to be too.
that's great. So if you could sit down with your younger self in 2014, I think it was, you said you started launch,
Yes.
what would you tell her before she launched Cider Spoon Stories?
Oh, I would say that I would just warn her that there were going to be those really lean times where I was going to feel like I had $200 in the bank account and what the heck was I going to do? And to just write it out that was part of the journey. I would say that you can never network enough in those early days. The more people you know who can recommend your business and that you can in turn learn from what they know about business has just been crucial to me. Even though I'm a solopreneur, Cider Spoon Stories is certainly not a ship I built alone. Whether it is people I met at networking events, or I've hired lots of paid interns over the years to help the business. And my husband being the silent partner in the background who supports me in all things. So I'd say, Jess, you think this is going to be really fun, and it's going to be super fun. It's also going to be way harder than you imagine. And you're going to one day not be in your 20s anymore, where everything feels like easy and, oh, it doesn't matter. And life is going to feel more serious at some point. And that's okay. Just trust what you've built, trust what you're capable of, trust the people around you, and it's all going to work out.
Yeah, I love that. Well put. And it's also Unfiltered Solopreneur, so you're in the right place to share that.
Yeah.
And also, I think you never know what's around the corner, right? Because there's these things of planting seeds and silent people, angels, or maybe whatever you want to call them, who are sitting out there, who are not necessarily liking things or commenting on things, but they step forward from behind the scenes, right? At points that you never imagined they would. So,
Right.
yeah, true. So this is a question a lot of solopreneurs struggle with, like pricing. So what's been the hardest lesson you've learned about pricing your work, and how did you figure out what your time and expertise are really worth?
It's I started at rock bottom pricing because I just thought, oh, this is a labor of love. This is something I did for my grandpa. And also, is anybody actually going to value this kind of expertise? It's just writing. My parents told me there was no money to be made in writing, so why would I charge something that felt like a living wage? No. But then it was meeting other ghostwriters, understanding what they charged, how they arrived at their rates. It was raising my rates a little bit with each book that I wrote. That was, 'cause each book on average takes 6 months. So that's another 6 months of experience and time and proof of concept under my belt. So it was that. It was starting to arrive at referral agreements with other ghostwriters, where, one might say, hey, I have too many clients right now. Jess, do you want to take this project? In exchange, you're going to pay me 10 or 15% of the contract because I'm gifting you this client. Well, okay, now I need to also raise my rates to account for, what I'm paying as referral fees to these other ghostwriters. That's just another one of the costs of doing business. So basically, yeah, my rates have just risen with those things. at a rate that is still going to allow the type of client that I want to work with be able to afford to work with me.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you because there's this myth out there, and a lot of gurus sitting out there and saying, charge your worth, never charge less than you think you're worth. But I think everyone starts at the bottom, right? Because to me, pricing is linked to confidence. And every time you have a
Yes.
win, you can do the next one because you have, as you build your proof and value of delivery, that is, I think, what allows you to get to the price you want to be. So,
Yes.
I'm going through that myself right now. My business is young; it's about just over a year old, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's exactly how it's done. Even though nobody really talks about that because it's not fun or sexy to say you have to charge less than you think you should be charging. But I
Yeah.
think that's just the way it works. And maybe in some businesses it doesn't, but I haven't found a business owner who's done it any other way so far in the solo world. And maybe there are other places, other industries which work a different way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So let me ask you now in terms of um, is there you talked about wearing multiple hats, learning so many different things from finances to branding. Is there a skill outside of writing that you wish you'd mastered earlier, like business or branding or marketing or finances, or do you feel like that's just sort of you've gone with the flow and learned it as you've built your business?
Good question. Um, Honestly, I'd say actually the most important part for me has not been a skill that I gained along the way, but something I had to let go of, which maybe relates to your question about how do I feel about not getting credit for certain ghostwriting projects. But I think I had a really big ego when I started my company. And I just thought, I'm going to be great at this. And every book I write is going to be perfect. I know more than the client, and et cetera, et cetera. And so it used to be in my first couple of ghostwriting projects, I would write the entire manuscript. We would do all of our interviews and I would write the whole manuscript before I let the client see any of the work. And
Wow.
that's not great because by the time they get the whole book, that's a really overwhelming thing to take in. And if you have not got the voice or the message right for that client, it's like, where do you even begin to rectify that? You have to throw the whole manuscript out. And so there was a lot of, I had to let go of that pride and be like, okay, Jess, you have a lot to learn. You're going to keep learning your entire life. Writing is a craft like a sport or anything else that you only get better at with practice. And just really subvert the ego that I was bringing in to the process. And so these days, the client is involved from the very beginning, not just in the interviews, but then as each chapter is written, I'm sending it to them to make sure that this is right. We've hit the nail on the head. Or if not, what are those adjustments we need to make early on so that the book does become exactly what they ultimately want it to be. And I guess because my focus now is on delivering a quality project, but also making sure it's what the client wanted it to be, that's why at all times the book still feels to me like theirs. It's their life story, their expertise. I'm just helping them put it on the page. And so that might be another reason why I'm okay with not having my name on the cover, because that client is the author in all the ways that truly matter.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you raise a really good point. I think a lot of solopreneurs sort of make this mistake when they go out on their own. And I think it's natural because, I think, the way we talk about it in building brands is you're not the hero, you're the guide. The client is always the hero, right? But most people,
Yeah.
tendency is, hey, I'm coming to solve your problem. So you should be the hero because you're the one solving the problem. But
Yeah.
that's not how it works because like you said, it's, what we're doing is helping them unlock something that's already there. We're not
Yes.
creating it for them. We're not pulling it out of thin air. But I think that's just a process we all go through in terms of understanding that by actually doing, right?
Yes.
So, yeah,
Definitely.
but it's an important lesson to learn. So tell me, is there something in your business you're still trying to figure out right now or grappling with?
Um, Something I wish I was better positioned to help some of my coaching clients through specifically is that the reason they haven't finished their books often or maybe they finished it, but they haven't published yet is because they're writing their life story and there's somebody mentioned in it who they know the publication of the book is going to hurt. that might be a parent or a sibling or whatever, but there's somebody's story who's mentioned and that person is still alive and they're afraid of hurting them. And I talk to my clients a lot about that fine line between owning your story and knowing that it is okay to share what has happened to you and what you've been through, while at the same time, respecting people's right to privacy and to own their own stories. And so, that's still something I have to navigate. Each client's story is a little bit different. And, what is the right, how do we tackle that in the right way for each one of those clients, is something that I feel like I'm still getting better at coaching them through, and don't always have the right answer there.
Yeah, well, that's a tough one. I can't say that. I don't know if there is a right answer, but it's like you said, it's sharing their experience honestly, right? Not finger pointing or blaming,
Yes.
or trying to apportion, trying to make out somebody in some way. So I think,
Right.
I don't know if there's another way to do it. And also ultimately, people are going to react the way they're going to react, right? You have to sort of also accept that a little bit when you share things. So
Yes.
people will take it the wrong way too. But no, you're right. It's that I can imagine is a tough sort of tight rope to navigate. So,
which is a challenge that every author actually is ultimately going to face. That even if they've gotten over the hurdle of being vulnerable with their ghostwriter and feeling comfortable sharing all of this, after it's on the page and they're actually getting ready to press publish and share this story with the world, you have to go through that whole process again of like, okay, am I ready to do this? And how am I going to handle it if people don't react the way that I hope they will? That's why there's a whole group of therapists that just work with creatives navigating that particular challenge. So I always recommend to authors that they get some help through that process, because it's scary.
It is scary, and you're sort of laying everything out bare, right? Probably you've shared things you've never told anybody, like you mentioned with your grandpa. So yeah, I get it, and I'm pretty sure ChatGPT cannot help you with that. So
right,
don't try. So in what ways has running this business changed you? And I don't mean as a writer, but as sort of a leader of your own career.
It's changed me in that I just don't take for granted the freedom of time that I have as a solopreneur. That if I'm just getting to the point in the afternoon where I'm having brain fog and I can't see clearly on the screen anymore, it's okay to step away and go take the dog for a walk and just be able to schedule my life in a way that works for me. That's just an incredible thing. Other ways that it's changed me, I mentioned that I write novels. There is no better practice for writing novels than interviewing people day in and day out. It is so great for character development and creating characters in your books with different kinds of motivations and complex motivations, because we're all very complex people
True.
in the real world. And so that was a great unintended benefit that I didn't foresee when I first started ghostwriting for people. I think it's just expanded my worldview in general. Like we talked about, writing for so many different people from so many different backgrounds. I think that's what I hope reading does. Like I hope when other readers pick up my clients' books and read them, they develop empathy for people who are not like them and who've had different experiences from them, but they can still recognize our shared humanity in those stories and how we all experience grief and love and those complicated human emotions. Like that's what should be at the heart of your memoir. And so just being reminded of that in this capacity as a ghostwriter and just having to always put myself in other people's shoes, I hope makes me a kinder person to everyone around me.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you're right. I mean, I think one of the big unlocks for me was, like you said, yesterday I hit a wall. I decided to go take a walk, and never felt guilty about the things I haven't done, right? Because that's a really important thing. It's not like, because in the corporate world, you're sort of taught to be on that treadmill or hamster wheel or whatever you call it. And if you're not on it, they're like, I remember there were people at work who would leave their office light on to make it look like they were still working after 6, even though they'd left, and leave their computer on, because it was so ingrained that every hour you work is, it's linked to this productivity thing. So no, I completely agree with you. I think in many ways, we have to unlearn a lot of the things we've learned from the corporate world. And I know you didn't spend a lot of time there, but that's just the way society is sort of built, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you are a small business owner and you are the only one who has to do all the tasks, you can take time off, but there's always something else you could be doing, always. And so, you do have to learn to create containers for the work, or it will become all consuming
Yeah,
easily.
true. If we were to meet again 3 years from now, what would you want to have achieved?
Oh, I mean, I would hope for the dream of every ghostwriter, right? That one of my books has made the New York Times bestseller list, and that the client shared credit, so my name was on the book too. That would be amazing. But honestly, just to continue having clients who experience catharsis through this process of sharing their story and feeling heard and understood by myself, by their readers. That's really what keeps me doing it again and again.
Yeah, and I love that. I'll look to see your book on the bestseller list, Jessica.
Thank you.
So if you could offer one piece of advice to somebody wanting to start their solopreneur journey, what would you tell them?
I would say that nobody can hire you if they can't find you. So you need to have a website, social media, if that's your thing, business cards for when you go to your networking events. Like, you have to prove that you're serious and taking action on things so that other people can also take you seriously. And you have to, oh man, when I was first starting my business and, as a ghostwriter, maybe not putting my names on books, so I didn't even have any evidence of what I was capable of, I had to get really creative. And I decided to partner with area nonprofits and write books that showcase their clients' stories. And I would be able to put my name on those books. So now, not only do I have a marketing tool that's showing what I'm capable of as a ghostwriter, but the sales of all those books were supporting those nonprofits too. So it was also giving back to the community. So you just have to be willing to try anything and work hard and get creative. And yeah, look around you and see who needs what you have to offer and where is there synergy that you can make that partnership possible.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love because you're right. You are sort of you are hidden, right, in terms of the
Yes.
inherently with the work that you do. I love that you had to think out of the box, and also, us solopreneurs don't come with big marketing budgets, right? So it's not like we
Right.
can just turn those taps on. We really have to find ways to get ourselves seen out there. But again, it's through delivering value, right? Like you said, it's not so much about, hey, I'm around, but it's actually showing people what I've done and
Yes.
how I've helped people. So I love that. So is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners that we haven't covered?
I would say if you have never thought about writing a book, you should consider it, because you are the only person that has ever existed that has lived your exact life. And because of that, you have something to offer to the rest of us, some perspective about what it means to be human that nobody else has written about before. And even if you don't end up publishing that, just the act of sitting down and writing that and processing your lived experiences and your feelings about it, there's just such value and clarity of purpose to be gained from that. So try journaling, try writing a book, try hiring a ghostwriter if you can't figure it out.
I love that. It sounds like it's the best therapy you can get, right? And probably the
Yes.
most cost effective in terms of not going to a therapist. But hire a ghostwriter. Yes, I agree with that, because it takes a lot of patience and discipline to write a book. I think so. So that brings us to our rapid fire round. So I'm just going to throw 5 questions at you and tell us what
Oh,
comes to mind.
okay.
So
Ready.
if you could write a book for any one person, living or dead, who would it be?
Kate Winslet.
Oh, wow, that's cool. I want to read that one.
Okay.
If your ghostwriting business was a Netflix show, how would you pitch it in one sentence?
uh, woman from blue collar family goes on to change the world.
I'll wait for that show.
Okay.
If you had a superpower for understanding people's stories, what would it be?
If I had a superpower for understanding their stories, my superpower would be able to read their minds, right? So that what they weren't able to articulate in speech, I could just go straight into the brain and pull it out of their memory bank.
That would be a cool power
Yes.
to have, one that you would need to use very responsibly.
Yes.
What's the weirdest client request for a book you received?
Well, this is one of the only clients I ever had to fire. It was a healthcare professional who I thought wanted to just write a book about his work in the healthcare industry. And it turned out to be a book about healthcare rationing, which is the idea that only the elite classes should be able to receive healthcare.
Wow.
And that was not a message that I could get behind. So that was one of the weirder and more unsavory projects I've been asked to work on.
And had to turn down.
Yes.
If you opened a writing retreat tomorrow, what would you call it?
Oh, well, great question, because I'm doing just that. It is called the Lincoln School Writers Retreat, and it's in Maine. And my husband are right now, my husband and I are working every summer on turning an 1870s schoolhouse into a writer's retreat up there, slowly renovating it as we can. So stay tuned, and that will eventually open.
I love that. I love that you're turning an old school into that. And just so everyone knows, that was not prompted.
All right.
A random question.
Amazing.
But anyway, that's a fun way to close the show. And I look forward to the retreat, because I want to write my book too. So I'll probably be giving you a call offline.
Yay, great.
Thank you so much for sharing your
you.
story so openly and honestly. I really appreciate it.
This was wonderful.
Here's what really struck me about Jessica's journey and what I think you can apply this week. Start by building a trust-first pipeline, not a promo-first pipeline. Jessica's business works because prospects arrive warm via search or referrals, and the very first conversation answers one question: do I feel safe with you? Translate that to your world. Make your earliest touchpoint feel like a pressure-free chemistry check, not a pitch. Show your process, your guardrails, and how you protect the client's story, data, or outcomes. You're selling peace of mind, not just deliverables. Second, ladder your offer so people can enter at different levels of readiness. She didn't stop at a done-for-you ghostwriting service. She added classes, editing, and coaching, adjacent steps that meet clients where they are and often convert upward. This way, you also design multiple but adjacent revenue streams, so if one stream stalls, then you have others to sustain you during the lean months. Third, treat networking as a business driver, not an afterthought. Jessica's biggest project came through another ghostwriter on LinkedIn, and it triggered a referral chain. Don't just hope for that kind of magic. Systematically create the conditions for it. Identify 20 to 30 adjacent professionals who meet your ideal clients before you do. Give them a forwardable one-paragraph description of what you do, and set up a simple rev share agreement. Fourth, price with proof and with costs in mind. She raised rates with each book accounting for referral fees and stopped entertaining royalty-only deals. Your move: list the true costs of delivery, including partner fees, set a floor you will not cross, and commit to a small raise every 2 to 3 projects closed. As your confidence compounds, so should your price. Finally, differentiate on your human edge. For memoirs, AI can't know what isn't online. The work requires empathy, listening for what's said and unsaid, and iterating chapter by chapter. In your niche, name the irreplaceable human skill you bring and bake it into your process headlines. Contrast isn't anti-AI, it's pro-outcome. If you implement just 2 things this week, set up your referral system and rewrite your discovery call to lead with trust building, you'll feel the shift in your next conversation. Thanks for listening to Unfiltered Solopreneur. If you got value from today's episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another solopreneur who needs this message. Until next time, keep breaking free from the corporate grind. And remember, your story is your most powerful asset. Live solo or die corporate.